You checked your account this morning, rent cleared, car insurance went through, groceries from yesterday posted, and you're staring at what's left, wondering how this is supposed to work. You're not living recklessly. No luxury apartment, no designer, anything. You pack lunch most days, your car is paid off, your phone is 2 years old, and still, you feel broke. Not broke in the dramatic sense, broke in the quiet, suffocating sense. The kind where you can't remember the last time you said yes to dinner without doing math in your head first. The kind where a flat tire isn't just inconvenient, it's destabilizing. You're making $50,000 a year, and it feels like you're failing. For most of your life, that number represented security. It was the threshold, the salary that meant you'd made it out of the struggle and into stability. Your parents probably earned less and owned a home. Your older coworkers talk about buying their first house on similar income 15 years ago. But when you look at your budget now, something doesn't line up. You're doing everything you were told to do. Splitting rent with a roommate or living in a smaller place. Driving an older car. Skipping the subscriptions you don't absolutely need. And somehow, the gap between what you earn and what everything costs keeps widening. It's not just you. 75% of middle-income Americans say their earnings don't cover their cost of living anymore. Not because they're overspending. Not because they lack discipline. Because something fundamental shifted, and the advice didn't. Here's what most people believe. If you feel broke on $50,000, you're either in an expensive city or you're not managing money correctly. The assumption is that this salary should still be enough in most places, that if you're struggling, the problem is you. That assumption sounds reasonable. It feels fair. $50,000 is above the median household income in many states. It's not wealth, but it shouldn't be poverty either. And if you're stressed about money at that level, surely you must be doing something wrong. This is the logic that keeps people silent about financial pressure. If the number looks fine on paper, admitting you're struggling feels like confessing incompetence. So people stay quiet, adjust quietly, stress quietly, convinced they're the only one who can't make it work. But when you examine what $50,000 actually buys now, compared to even 5 years ago, the picture changes completely. In 2018, $50,000 had the purchasing power of about $63,000 in 2024. That means if your salary stayed flat over those 6 years, you effectively took a 20% pay cut without anyone lowering your paycheck. The number didn't change. The value did. This isn't about feeling broke. It's about being functionally broker. The gap isn't psychological. It's structural. And it's not evenly distributed. General inflation averaged around 4% annually over the past 5 years. But essentials didn't follow that average. Housing costs rose nearly 30% between 2020 and 2025. Health insurance premiums climbed 7% per year, 15% total since 2022. Food prices spiked, then stayed elevated. These aren't discretionary expenses. You can't opt out of rent. You can't skip insurance if you want to stay employed and avoid catastrophic risk. You can't stop eating. The costs that consume most of a $50,000 budget all inflated faster than wages, and faster than the headline numbers suggest. So, when someone says $50,000 should still be enough, they're anchoring to a version of the economy that no longer exists. The salary didn't lose value because you mismanaged it. It lost value because the cost structure underneath it changed. Here's the invisible mechanism most people miss. Inflation compounds on your fixed costs before it touches your discretionary income. When rent goes up $50 a month, that's $600 a year, that vanishes from every other category. When your car insurance jumps 15%, that's another $250 you don't get to decide about. When groceries cost 12% more, none of those increases ask permission. If you're earning $50,000 and your fixed costs were 60% of your budget 5 years ago, they might be 75% now. Not because you upgraded anything, because the same apartment, the same car, the same food, all cost more. That 15% shift doesn't just shrink your cushion, it removes categories entirely. The money that used to go toward replacing your couch, or visiting family twice a year, or saving for something 6 months away, that money just isn't in the budget anymore. It didn't move. It dissolved. And because the increases happen slowly, a rent increase here, an insurance adjustment there, a grocery bill that climbs $5 a week, you don't see one dramatic break. You see 100 small ones. A declined dinner invitation, a delayed car repair, a savings goal you stop mentioning. This creates a secondary effect most people don't name. decision fatigue around money stops being about big choices and becomes constant. Every purchase under $20 starts requiring evaluation. Not because you're careless, because your margin disappeared. You're not managing a budget anymore. You're managing ongoing scarcity on an income that's supposed to represent stability. And here's what makes it harder to recognize. The lifestyle you're maintaining probably looks middle class from the outside. You're still working full-time. You're still covering your bills. Your rent gets paid. Your car runs. To anyone watching, it looks like you're fine. But fine doesn't mean secure. Fine means you haven't missed a payment yet. It doesn't account for the emergency fund that never rebuilds, the dental work you've been putting off, the fact that one bad month, one unexpected expense that isn't catastrophic but isn't small either, could destabilize everything for weeks. This is the space where $50,000 lives now. Not poverty, not security. Somewhere in between, where the math technically works but the breathing room doesn't. The problem isn't the salary in isolation. It's that the benchmarks we inherited, the advice about what this income should afford, the expectations around what counts as reasonable, those benchmarks calcified while costs accelerated. So when someone says 50,000 should be enough, what they often mean is, it was enough before, so the issue must be you. But the floor moved. And pretending it didn't just leaves people blaming themselves for a structural shift they didn't cause and can't control. Let's walk through what this actually looks like in practice. You're earning $50,000 a year. After federal and state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, you're taking home around $38,000. That's about $3,200 a month. Rent for a modest one-bedroom in a mid-sized city. Maybe $1,300. Not luxury. Not downtown. Just a place with working appliances and no major safety concerns. That's 40% of your take-home. A decade ago, this same apartment might have cost $1,000. Housing costs have risen around 27% since 2020 alone. Car insurance, renter's insurance, health insurance premiums, if your employer doesn't cover everything, that's another $300 monthly. Groceries for one person, buying mostly basics, cooking at home, $250 to $300 depending on the week. Gas or transit to get to work, another $100. Phone bill, internet you need for work, another $100 total. You're at $2,050 in fixed, non-negotiable costs. That leaves about $1,150. Now add student loan payments. Even a modest loan balance means $200 a month. Utilities that aren't included in rent, another $120. That drops you to $830. This is the money that has to cover every meal you don't cook at home, every piece of clothing that wears out, every toiletry and household item, every copay, every car repair, every birthday gift, every single thing that isn't already listed. $830 sounds manageable. Until your car needs new tires. That's $500 you weren't planning for. Now you have $330 left for the rest of the month, or your cat needs a vet visit. $200, or your phone screen cracks and you need it for work. Another $150. This is an illustration, not a prescription. Your numbers might be different. Maybe your rent is lower, but your commute is longer. Maybe you don't have student loans, but you're helping family. The exact figures shift, but the pattern holds. When your margin is this thin, there's no such thing as a minor expense. Everything becomes major because the buffer that's supposed to absorb variation doesn't exist anymore. You're not living paycheck to paycheck because you're careless. You're living that way because the math allows almost no deviation. And this is on $50,000, a salary that, in theory, represents stable middle-income employment. The issue isn't that any single cost is irresponsible. It's that when fixed costs consume 70 to 75% of your income, you're operating in a margin too narrow to accommodate normal life. Not extravagant life. Normal life. The kind where things break, where people get sick, where opportunities cost money even when they're worthwhile. And if you're trying to save anything, if you're trying to build an emergency fund, or contribute to retirement, or put aside money for a future that isn't just more of this, you're pulling from the same $800 that's already spoken for. That's not a budgeting failure. That's a structural inability for this income level to perform the function it used to perform. What this does psychologically is more corrosive than the financial pressure itself. When you're managing money at this level, every decision carries weight it shouldn't have to carry. Saying yes to coffee with a friend isn't casual. It's a trade-off. Replacing your worn-out shoes isn't automatic. It's a negotiation with yourself about whether you can wait another month. This creates a constant low-grade stress that doesn't resolve. Not because you're in crisis, but because you're always 30 days away from one. You're not making big financial mistakes. You're just never comfortable, never relieved, never certain that next month won't be the one where something breaks and you can't cover it without consequences. And because this is happening on an income that's supposed to represent security, you internalize it as personal failure. If 50,000 should be enough, and it doesn't feel like enough, then the problem must be you. You must be spending wrong, prioritizing wrong, living wrong somehow. But you're not. You're experiencing the friction of an income that used to provide breathing room, now providing only enough air to not suffocate. That's not the same as comfort. That's not the same as security. That's just not drowning. This distinction matters because it changes what relief looks like. Relief isn't fixing your budget. Relief is acknowledging that the budget isn't broken. The salary just doesn't stretch as far as it used to. And that's not a personal failure. When you understand that, you stop blaming yourself for feeling financial pressure on an income that, on paper, should be fine. You stop measuring yourself against outdated benchmarks. And you stop thinking that if you could just optimize harder, eliminate more, sacrifice better, it would finally feel okay. It doesn't work that way. Optimization can't create margin that doesn't exist. What you're left with is a different kind of orientation, not learning to stretch the salary further, but recognizing what it realistically covers now and making decisions from that truth instead of from the expectation of what it should cover. This means letting go of some of the shame around not having savings. Not because savings don't matter, but because pretending you're failing when the math doesn't allow for it just adds emotional weight to financial strain. It means reconsidering what responsible financial behavior looks like when your margin is 10% instead of 30%. The advice designed for someone with breathing room doesn't translate cleanly when breathing room doesn't exist. It means recognizing that if you're keeping your bills paid on $50,000 right now, you're not failing. You're managing a harder version of this income than the previous generation dealt with. The number might be the same, but the weight is different. And it means understanding that if you want more margin, if you want actual security, instead of just functional survival, the answer probably isn't spending less. It's earning more, or structurally reducing fixed costs in ways that require big changes, not small optimizations. Neither of those is easy, but they're honest. And honesty about what $50,000 actually does now is more useful than advice designed for what it used to do. You're not broke because you're careless. You're feeling broke because the math changed underneath you, and nobody adjusted the expectations. That's not failure. That's just reality. And once you stop fighting reality, you can start working with it instead of against it. $50,000 doesn't mean what it used to mean. It doesn't buy what it used to buy. And recognizing that doesn't make you weak. It makes you accurate. The pressure you're feeling isn't imagined. It's real. And it's not your fault.